This is awkward. Now, in my defense, this title is nowhere near as bad as it may seem, as this video was more focused on the fact that Man City's age profile isn't great and that a small rebuild is on the way, something I do still agree with. However, if you ask me when I made this video, would I expect Man City to win the Premier League, let alone the treble, I would have told you no. But a few months down the line, and here we are. This is how Pep Guardiola turned this Man City side into potential treble winners. Now, before I get into the video properly, there is one more thing I need to address, which is where on earth the videos on this channel went. And because I'm such an honest, lovely man, I can tell you for the last few months, I've actually been working at some random football club in Manchester with this bald bloke. All because he needed some help to make his team good again, and he'd noticed how impeccable my ball knowledge was from the videos on this channel. But don't worry, I'm back now and we can put this small hiatus behind us. On to the video, and I think it makes sense to give a bit of context on how Man City have actually got to this stage, which of course all starts with their takeover in 2008. Instead of splashing their cash on various marquee signings like many other clubs after a big money takeover, Man City invested smartly in players and managers whilst they worked behind the scenes on creating the best footballing infrastructure in the entire world. A new state-of-the-art training complex would be built, as well as investment in youth teams and feeder clubs. However, most importantly of all in my opinion, the club would appoint former Barcelona man Ferran Soriano as CEO, who knew how to get the club up to the standards of the best manager in the world, Pep Guardiola. Guardiola would then arrive in 2016, and after 2 summers to build his squad, we saw Man City become very successful on the football pitch. And when I say very successful, I mean very successful. 100-point season? Check. Domestic treble? Check. First ever Champions League final? Check. In his near 7 years at the Citizens so far, Pep Guardiola has won 5 Premier League titles, 2 FA Cups, 4 League Cups and 2 Community Shields, and if Man City can win one more game this season, they'd become just the second English side to ever win the treble. However, you don't actually have to rewind that far for people to think an achievement like that would simply never happen for Pep in England. In the Champions League, Man City had become notorious bottlers, with somewhat embarrassing defeats to the likes of Monaco, Liverpool, Tottenham, Lyon, Chelsea, and most notably Real Madrid last year, where despite statistically having a 99% chance of progressing through to the final with just seconds left of the game, Man City would concede twice to Rodrigo before Karim Benzema then finished them off, allowing rival fans to laugh at them more and more each time. A phrase you would also often hear on social media is that Man City could win the Champions League with their second team, referring to the fact that they'd spent a huge amount of money on an incredibly large squad filled with talent, and one that any manager in world football should see success with. And for a while at least, that was true. At one point their squad included Claudio Bravo, Ederson, Kyle Walker, Danilo, Kompany, Stones, Laporte, Otamendi, Zinchenko, Foden, Gundogan, De Bruyne, Bernardo Silva, David Silva, Fernandinho, Sterling, Sane, Mahrez, Aguero, Jesus and even more. And so despite the fact that I do think it's silly to just assume that any squad with good players should win everything, you would expect a little bit more from that team. However, over the years, that squad slowly and surely slimmed down, with just 8 of the players I previously mentioned still being at the club. The fact is, for a while Man City have actually had one of the smallest squads in the league, and they very rarely spend as much as the likes of Man United, Chelsea and Arsenal in the transfer market. And even when they have spent big on Jack Grealish for example, said signings are often ridiculed for not instantly being world beaters every week, despite the fact that these same fans are also the ones going on about how big and talented their squad is, and how that makes them impossible to beat, which sounds like a bit of a contradiction if you ask me. To put it simply, everything Man City have done over the past few years has been massively scrutinised, a lot of it fairly to be fair. However, nonetheless there is times where it feels like they can do nothing right amongst football social media. However, going into this season they were still favourites for every tournament they were in, partly down to the fact they just signed arguably the best striker in world football, Erling Haaland. Man City's start to the season wouldn't match these lofty expectations though, where after losing the League Cup to Southampton was quickly followed up by another 2-1 Derby Day defeat to Man United, the Citizens found themselves 5 points behind Arsenal having played a game more, and were actually closer to the Red Devils than the top of the league. But it would be this point here where a solution to their problem would be found. You see, despite him breaking scoring records across the season, many people believed that Erling Haaland had actually done more damage than good and was causing Man City to play worse than they had before his arrival. And then when Pep Guardiola sat in his seat following that notorious 2-1 loss, he took a look at his starting 11 and decided change had to be made. Their team simply wasn't working, and as ruthless as it sounded, Pep Guardiola had no choice but to remove Riyad Mahrez and Phil Foden alongside João Cancelo at the back. These changes, most notably being the departure of Cancelo to Bayern Munich, were met with huge backlash on social media. However, as some of you may remember, I actually pointed out that this made complete sense. And the reason behind my thinking back then was that with the sale of Zinchenko in the summer and the addition of Nathan Ake at left back, it was becoming clear that Pep Guardiola wanted more proper defenders in his backline. This is also the point in the story where it makes most sense to me to delve into the tactical side of things. Now, what do we know about the simple principles of Pep Guardiola's teams? They want to score goals and win, but more importantly control games, and that is done by Pep asking his teams to control possession and press high. Except, over the course of this season, he realised that it's simply impossible to control 90 minutes of a game against the world's best sides, and so when you're playing against the likes of Vinicius Jr, Mo Salah, etc, it holds more value to have a defensive shape built up of players who are great defenders first and then also comfortable on the ball, instead of players who are some of the best technicians in the world but only good at defending. If we take a look at Man City's shape in possession here, we can see if the ball's turned over high up in the pitch, these are the spaces a team is going to want to attack on the break, where they'll normally find 1v1s against these wide centre backs or deeper midfielders. And so in Rodri, Stones, Walker, Ake, Akanji and Diaz, Pep has a group of players which are less likely to be beaten than a player like Zinchenko or Cancelo, thus reducing their risk of conceding. But now I know what you're thinking. Surely if you remove players who are better with the ball, it would make it harder for Man City to progress, and therefore they'd lose control of the game. However, Pep also found a solution to that problem, thanks to the arrival of a certain Italian on the south coast. You see, not only did Man City already have an incredible technical squad anyways, but Pep Guardiola also studied the unique build-up sequences of De Zerbi's Brighton, which has naturally allowed them to create this new system. What Brighton and now Man City do is to simply stand on the ball waiting for the opponent to come and press them. It sounds silly but it's true, and then when said opposition forwards press them, Man City will use one or two simple passes to beat an entire group of players in a far more effective way than previously, sometimes even just using Haaland's physical stature and pace to play one long ball and catch an opponent out, meaning the loss of Zinchenko and Cancelo is nowhere near as problematic as it may have been before. And so with these new tactics in place, Man City started to cause havoc. First they beat Arsenal to catch up to them in the league before a destruction of RB Leipzig, and then arguably their toughest test in Bayern Munich saw them progress through to the semi-finals of the Champions League. Unsurprisingly, the likes of Burnley and Sheffield United also couldn't stop them from making it through to the FA Cup final, and by the time their second fixture against Arsenal came round, unfortunate injuries and poor results for the Gunners meant that a dominant 4-1 win would be enough to all but secure them the title with weeks to go, as they went on to be crowned champions not too long later after Arsenal's loss to Nottingham Forest. As well as this, a 1-1 draw at the Bernabeu meant they had the slight advantage going into the Champions League second leg, where they absolutely battered Los Blancos. 4 goals with no return meant that the citizens had just qualified for their second Champions League final ever, and this time they looked unbeatable. But before they could even think about European glory, they had quite possibly the most important game in the Manchester derby's history, as for the first time ever, Man United and Man City would be meeting in a cup final. Everything was on the line, with Man United looking to defend their status as the only English side to ever win the treble, and their noisy neighbours were looking to match their rivals' success, where after seconds, captain İlkay Gündoğan put them ahead. Another volley in the second half would cancel out Man United's earlier equaliser, and after holding out to win the trophy, Man City found themselves just one game away from making history, which is where we find ourselves today. Despite being a much bigger side with more illustrious history, the past isn't going to benefit Inter Milan now, and so the odds really are in Man City's favour, having found themselves with no hope of even winning the Premier League, let alone the treble just a few months ago. And to be honest, even if they lose on Saturday, you'd be an absolute madman to bet against Man City being right back here in a year's time, as Pep Guardiola has truly built one of, if not the, best team of all time.